We're recording. Hi, good morning and welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you this morning. This is our third installment of Your Environment Now with Dr. Hildur Palsdottir. I always have your hard time with your last name. I'm so sorry, Hildur.
I'm the daughter of Paul, so you can just say Paul's daughter.
Not
Paul.
This one.
Not this Paul, but.
So, Hildur, it's very exciting that you have Paul with us today, who's going to be talking about a wonderful subject. And I wonder if you might do some introductions, not only to what we're going to talk about, but perhaps Paul, you can do the same, and then we can kind of get into it, because this is really about your environment now and how we can go ahead and make it a better world. So Hildur,
Yes.
What are we talking about today?
So as we're here sheltering in place, I have been making some changes to the way I compost. And perhaps the first question would be why I compost. Why compost? Well, we talked about it in our last episode that it's really irresponsible right now to have organic waste rot in a landfill, given the consequences, the greenhouse gas emissions and such. And I don't know if I
can see that very clear.
Dirt. I'm obsessed with dirt. This book is written by a fantastic scientist, David R. Montgomery, and he talks about the erosion of civilizations. In this book, in his words, he says an estimated 24 billion tons of soil are lost annually around the world, several tons for each person on the planet every year. That's significant because topsoil is what feeds our plant life, and that's essentially feeding a life, capturing sunlight and feeding life on Earth. And intensive agricultural practices and the way we as homeowners treat the soil. If we're putting what could be soil into a plastic bag that's rotting in a landfill, or worse, ending up in an incinerator, it's really not a life-sustaining practice. So as we shelter in place, taking notice of your organic food waste and keeping it really simple, even starting with the as we talked about last time, the yard waste, right? But we've taken it a step further, so we're working with anything that's, you know, vegetables, fruit, and I'll let Paul speak to this, but I brought my Bokashi indoor composter. My brother in Iceland is doing this. Bokashi. This is my starter book here. I haven't started doing Bokashi. I've been doing a very sort of basic compost, outdoor tumbler going into a pile.
So Hildur, I have to interrupt you because you know, Bokashi is really something that I really feel like when you say it, you have to say it with an air of exuberance.
Oh yes, Bokashi. Bokashi. So it's really, as you can see, you can just buy the bin like this. It comes and it gives you already an instruction on the sticker. The reason why we're moving over to Bokashi, I'll let Paul speak to that. I am very interested in being a climate conscious gardener. And here are wonderful resources. So I'll include that as you post the video. I can include these resources: Easy Compost, Gardener's Guide to Composting, Let It Rot. It's really much easier than it sounds. People think it's like an overwhelming task to add to your day. And as part of an effort here to educate homeowners and our neighbors, it's an honor to have Paul join us, and we're part of something called Transition Town Network. And if you could speak to that, Paul, and teach me and all of us here how to move from, if we're doing regular compost, why do Bokashi? Bokashi. and you know, why should I consider that?
Okay.
and
Paul,
how
Paul,
to
you're now required to do Bakashi.
every time you say
Kashi. So it actually, it's a Japanese word and it means fermented organic matter. So it lends itself to an exuberant expression. So you don't have to be a PhD like Hildur, and you don't have to assemble a library. And, you know, composting, which Bokashi is really part of, is something it's a natural process. It's not something that requires, you know, any type of deep scientific knowledge. So I really want to approach, you know, this discussion from the standpoint of demystifying it. I live in Port Washington. I've lived here over 35 years. I put a compost pile in when I moved in because I grew up in Queens. I grew up with a compost pile in my backyard. Many of our neighbors had one. It was the normal thing to do before the 1950s, when the, you know, food revolution really took off and people started, you know, buying ready-made food and packaged food and not growing and cooking their own food. It was a normal thing to do to have a compost. It was a normal thing to do to not throw your food waste into the you know, into the landfill. So I really want to demystify and make this kind of a simple process. Now, I have to say that by way of qualification, I came to this because of the environmental needs. To me, it's a side benefit that I'm going to get a very nutrient-rich soil additive to put in my garden. I'm not an avid or very successful gardener. I've always grown tomatoes and lettuce with varying degrees of success, not with other things. But I'm enthusiastic about having better compost to grow my garden. And through the, you know, the inspiration of Hildur and Raju and Rewild, I'm going to, you know, try to pay more attention to having a, you know, a healthy outdoors on my own property.
Now, let me just stop you there for a second, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, your experience over 25 years is great. You know, fantastic. And the other thing I'm really struck by is right now how, you know, all of us are talking about how we hate to go out to the store. And produce is, you know, is questionable. You don't know now, you have to bring it home. And someone was actually talking about, you know, washing their produce with not only vinegar or lemon, but also Clorox. I mean, that came up in, you know, in terms of some of the things. So what you're saying right now is the ability to do what we do inside and then be able to go ahead and create some nutrient-rich soil so that we can take that outside and really have a better life so we don't have to be freaked out about going to the store. And I think that's just fantastic, and I'm really excited about you talking today.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're talking really about, you know, making more of a closed loop in terms of what you consume. And I think that, you know, the composting and home gardening all fits into that. So I just wanted, before I forget, I just wanted to talk, because Hildur asked me about Transition Town. So last year, a friend of mine, Margaret here in Port Washington, she said, Paul, a group of us have gotten together and you know, we're talking about some of the things that you've been interested in kind of more on an island or statewide basis. And so, you know, I came down to see what they were talking about. I met Hildur, I met Raju, and I said, you know, these are smart people doing things in the community. I should really join this. So our focus is on sustainability and resilience in our own community. And it's just so prescient because we didn't anticipate, you know, a global pandemic, but a lot of what we talked about trying to build, you know, is now starkly clear how we need it. We're hampered, as everyone is, in terms of, you know, community activities, but you know, a big part of it also is building community. So we want to learn from each other, help each other, do things together, whether it's virtually or, you know, physically together. And I think that, you know, we can see how at risk we are and how dependent we are upon, you know, our own resources and our networks in our own communities. It's an important thing. And, you know, the public and even private institutions can't do it all. Everybody has has to step up to do it.
Right.
So
think local and act global. Yeah.
exactly, it all ties in together. So again, I do not like, I was going to say hate, but that's too strong a word. I do not like raking leaves. So Hilda's come up with a solution for that. I put them in the planting beds now. I'm excited about that. I do not like mowing my grass. So Raju and Rewild have taught me, you don't need grass anymore. My children are grown. They don't need to play on grass. So I've killed my lawn, and I'm going to be putting in flowers that I've bought through Rewild. And, you know, I don't like watering. So I've learned the advantages of putting compost and mulch on my planting beds. So I'll have to water less. So, you know, it's not that I'm lazy. It's just that I have other interests that I want to pursue. And I think a healthy way is really a much more of a less labor intensive way to do it. So
Paul, come on now. You know, it sounds to me like, you know, you've really not only taken the express lane to environmental care, if you will, but you've also perfected some of this kabashi.
Well, let's talk about the bokashi then.
Yeah,
okay?
bokashi.
Yeah. So it's not a substitute for composting. It's part of really the composting process. In effect, it's fermenting your organic food wastes. And I became interested in doing it because I didn't like taking my kitchen scraps out to the compost, which is, you know, across my yard, not a big yard, but in the winter, it's rainy, it's snowy. I didn't like going out there and doing that every night. That was just, you know, something that was unpleasant to do. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and I didn't want to put my food scraps into the garbage. So I learned about bokashi towards the end of last year, and I did a little research, not a lot, and I said, wow, I don't have to go outside. I can do it indoors. And that's what initially appealed to me. Then I learned about the benefits for the garden and what it produces. And I said, well, this is, you know, really a win-win. So what I'd like to do is quickly go through some slides just to show you what my setup looks like.
Right.
So let me just pull that up, and just take me a second here.
So this is something you've set up, but everyone can sort of model this. And I think, Hildur, you said we were going to also have some slides and some references as well that we could post up on the site. Yeah. Yeah.
So Keith, I want to emphasize the important thing is keep your food waste out of the food stream. It's a significant contributor to global warming. You know, it produces a lot of methane in the landfill. That's important. Also, let's create a healthier, richer soil, as Hildur talked about before. That's also important for the environment. It filters out pathogens and toxins, and it creates healthier plants, vegetables, etc. So these are good, important things to do, but do what's easiest for you. So again, this is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and there are different ways of home food waste disposal. Our friend Francine here in Port Washington uses an electric composter, and it's easy for her. She told me, I checked in with her yesterday, and she said, well, you know, I'm using it a lot now because we're home all the time, and it's actually not big enough. So I don't think it produces true compost, but it heats and chops up the food waste. So that's something to look at, but they cost $300 plus. So that's an option for people that may not want to do some of the other things. There's vermiculture or composting with worms. Raju has done that. There's outdoor compost, which we've talked about. And bokashi is part of really the composting process. So it's putting food scraps in a sealed bucket. It's anaerobic, no air. The microorganisms that we use in bokashi are different than the microorganisms that break down food in your compost, which are aerobic and require air. So it's fermentation, like making pickles or sauerkraut or beer or wine. As I said before, you fill your bucket, You add this Bokashi bran, which I'll talk about a little bit more. After you fill your bucket, you let it ferment for 2 weeks. Then you have to put the fermented food waste. It's very acidic at that point, about 3.9 pH. So it needs to actually decompose. So at that point, it needs to be covered up in your garden or compost. And then you've got this very rich soil amendment that you can use. So here's what my setup looks like. This is my kitchen counter.
Does it smell a lot, Phil?
It does not smell at all. It does not smell at all. It does. If anything, there's like a mild fermented smell, like, you know, beer or wine. But I basically have no smell, and I've got a pretty finely attuned nose. So when it's fermenting, it's sealed. Okay. But when you open it up each night to put more scraps in, the Bokashi bran, the microorganisms are working to ferment that food waste, so you have no rotting, no smell, and it also therefore doesn't attract any insects or animals when it's outside. So anyway, I want to go through this quickly. So here I've been cutting up, peeling some apples, and there's some lemons, and you can see below my counter there's my garbage bin, and the smaller one is my food scrap bin. Now, if you didn't have a setup like this in your kitchen, you could have a food scrap bin on your counter. It doesn't have to be very large. It just has to be large enough to hold the food scraps that you're going to create, like, say, in a day. Typically, it's something that you might do daily. So this is what the bin looks inside with the food scraps in it. You see some onion skins. I've taken the bin out now. I keep my Bokashi buckets. These are my Bokashi buckets. I keep them downstairs, but they could be kept under the counter in your kitchen. Why do I have two? Well, one is full and it's fermenting. It's going to ferment for 2 weeks before it goes outside. The other one is the one that I'm filling up on a daily basis. Every night I take the bin out, go downstairs, fill it up in the bin, and I put so this is what it looks like in the bin. You can see carrots and celery, some other things, and it's got the Bokashi bran on top of it, which contains the microorganisms. Now you can make that Bokashi bran. Raju is trying to do that. It's not hard to do, but it's easier to buy it. And this is a bag of it. It costs about $10. It's lasted me a couple of months. I think one bag could get you enough to liberally ferment 4 5-gallon buckets. Now, I also want to go back 2 slides. You see these taps on the bottom of the bucket. The process produces a liquid. Liquid leaches out of the vegetables. And when it's fermenting, it has to be tapped off. So that 1 quart jar on the side there is about 3/4 filled with the Bokashi tea. It's called Bokashi tea. And this is a super concentrated fertilizer, if you will. You have to dilute it 100 to 1 to use on your plants. I've put some on my indoor plants. You can put it on your outdoor plants, but it has to be heavily diluted. But you can put it full strength down your drains, and it will help eat up the organic sludge. In fact, in some places, what they do, they use Bokashi to basically clean up pollution, water pollution primarily. So that's kind of another benefit. I don't think I'm going to do that as a home gardener, but at a larger scale, that's what's done. So my second bucket. Go ahead, please.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
So you're not. I saw the carrots were big. Do you chop it down really small?
Well, that's a good question. If you chop it up, I do try to chop things a little bit smaller, like 2 inches in size. The reason being, it breaks down quicker. If you put pieces that are too large in, it'll take longer to break down. And I've had success kind of fermenting things in 2 weeks, but I'm not obsessive about it. I'm not trying to chop everything up into very fine pieces. Now, the other thing I should mention is it also can break down meat and animal products. Now, I don't do that. We eat very little animal products here. But if you don't want to separate that, it will break down animal products. But naturally, if they're large bones, that would take longer to break down. And also, when it goes outside, and I'll move ahead to that. So this is my compost pile in the back there. I used to have 2 wood bins, and I moved things back and forth, and I tried to do what's called hot composting, which requires much more work. But now I just have this one bin, and it's cold composting. It breaks down after about a year, and every spring, and I would put food scraps, but also a lot of yard waste in, and then I would put it on my vegetable plots and around my plants and everything. And but it took a while to break down. So I put one 5-gallon bucket in the compost, and in 2 weeks I had this really rich, dark compost, and it was really like nothing I'd ever seen before. Now that's only one time, and I may have been, my reaction may have been colored by hope a little bit. So, but that's what I've read happens, and it seems to be what happened with my compost. So I was, again, I said I did this for environmental reasons, but I'm excited as to have this benefit, and I'm hoping to be a better gardener before it. Now, the second bokashi bucket I put in my garden directly. These are my garden plots for vegetables. And I dug a trench about 9 inches deep, and I put the bokashi in there. Now you can see this is fermented, but it's still not decomposed. You can see the pieces of vegetables and fruit. Then I covered it up, and within 2 weeks it was completely decomposed. So you do have to cover it up because it's decomposing. It would attract animals if it was just left out naturally, because the decomposition process, could attract animals. But after 2 weeks, you're ready to go with that. There's a third system that you could use if you didn't want to use it right away. You could create what's called a soil factory, which basically take a big bin, mix a third bokashi with 2/3 good soil or compost, mix it up, and then after 2 weeks, you're going to have a very rich soil that you could use as potting soil or in the garden. So again, I've said this already, use it in the garden, use it in the compost, make a soil factory. Or if you just want to do it for environmental reasons and you don't have a garden, donate it to a neighbor who's a gardener, or a community garden, or the community compost. Hildur is going to be building one at the Science Museum, so you can donate it. This is something that's good to do whether you use it outside or not. So again, it can be done indoors. Only takes a few minutes each day. I go down to the basement, so it takes me a little bit longer. Take out the kitchen scraps, put it in the bokashi bucket, sprinkle a little bokashi bran on it, close it up, rinse out the kitchen bucket, kitchen container, put it back in. Takes me a few minutes, no more effort than that. It's a habit that's easy to create. And doesn't attract insects or animals. I don't have to go out in the cold or the wet. It accelerates the decomposition of the compost, creates a nutrient-rich fertilizer. It's quick and easy to set up. You can buy the buckets like Hildur did. Hildur, how much did you pay for your bucket? You're on mute.
I got this one on Amazon.com, and now that I see your setup, the next bucket will just be where did you get yours?
Well, I had a couple of buckets, and I bought the taps, and I bought what's called a grit guard to put inside, so to keep your bucket, if you show us the inside of it, so that keeps the vegetables above the bottom, so the liquid can leach down to the bottom and be tapped off. So I spent about $15 for miscellaneous parts. Raju has done some research on this, and he's posted links to different ways of setting up the buckets. So if you just want to buy it like Hildur, you can do that. I'm sorry, how much did you say you paid for it?
I'm gonna go find it. I can't remember.
I'm gonna get, I think that one's about $50 maybe.
Yeah, and it came with the starter.
Oh, so you got the Bokashi brand along with it. That's great.
Yeah.
You're ready to go.
And
Paul,
that's,
did you?
yeah.
Go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, Paul, did you attach? So your buckets did not come with that tap, right?
Yeah, mine are regular paint buckets, you know,
Okay,
that
so
buy at Home
you
Depot.
just like stuck the taps in?
Well, you had to drill a little hole and put the taps in. The taps cost $5 a piece, and so it's easy enough to do, you know, if you just want to do that. But if you don't want to do it, you just want to buy it, and you know the expense is not too much of an issue, you can do that. And as I said, Raju has posted different ways of doing it. So I just don't. I want to encourage people to just do it. It's not complicated. It's not hard.
Yeah.
Another factor to consider, though, is the bucket, when it's full, weight about 30 pounds. So, you know, I have to carry it out of the basement and put it outside. Now, there are 3.5-gallon buckets that are smaller than the 5-gallon buckets. So, you know, if you're small and you want to and you have to carry it yourself and you're concerned about the size, you can use a smaller bucket to do that. So, questions? Go ahead, Keith.
Yes, Paul, just a question around Bokashi. Specifically, my understanding is that it's not really as much of a composting method, but really a fermenting method that achieves the same goals, but then there are some nutrient-rich aspects about it that are quite different and quite more effective, if you will, for the environment, for growing. Is that,
yeah.
Is that your experience as well?
Well, you know, you're essentially correct. I mean, from what I've read and my experience with that one bucket is that it jumpstarts your compost. Hot composting can take 6 months. Cold composting can take a year. You put Bokashi in your compost, a couple of weeks, you're going to have something you can use in the garden. So it jumpstarts it. From what I've read, what I understand, the nutrients are much richer. So you're going to create a more nutrient-rich soil amendment. And the best way to look at Bokashi is that it's part of the composting process. You can't use it directly. You have to let it decompose for 2 weeks. But it's part of the process. Now, if you're currently taking your food scraps out to your compost, and you say, you know, that's fine. I don't mind waiting 6 months or a year, and it's been working for me. I was doing this for a long time, and you know, it wasn't a problem. It's just that I wasn't getting really rich compost, and I had to go outside in the cold and wet weather. Now you know, sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. As I've learned a little bit more about it, you know, I feel more committed to doing it. But it's net. I look at it as less work with better results. Now, but again, if somebody wants to use an electric composter, or it's more, I shouldn't say wants to, it's more convenient for you to do it, or you want to continue to try to do hot composting or cold composting, I encourage you to do it. And the important thing is let's keep our food scraps, you know, out of the waste for environmental reasons, and let's create healthier, richer soil. So, you know, we all want to read, you know, about dirt as Hildur does, but you know, we don't have to wait to read the book to understand that, you know, richer soil is better for the planet.
That's fantastic.
I love that.
Yes, and my brother, he swears by this method because he's in Iceland, so it's not really exciting to go out in the winter into a frozen compost pile. So he actually has been using this throughout the winter in Iceland, this exact method. And then at the same time you and Raju started talking about this, I think I feel inspired. I think I made it easy for myself by just buying the kit. And yes, it was $50, but now that I have the kit, I think I could make the other bin.
So
so-
one of the things that I don't know, and Hildur, if you could ask your brother this. So I said, well, what do I do in the winter after I've got a fermented bucket? I don't want to dig a trench in my garden in the winter. Can I dump it in my compost? What if my compost's frozen? And I said, well, here in Port Washington, it's probably not going to be frozen all the time. It might freeze on the top. I probably can do that, but I haven't actually been through the winter, so I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I could leave these buckets sitting around, but I only have 2. So if you could ask your brother what he does with his bokashi in the winter,
yes,
I'd be interested to know. I don't know the answer to that.
I know that he actually puts those, he has several buckets and puts them on the balcony. And then when it warms, whenever he gets an opportunity, digs a hole in and disposes of it. And he's doing this purely for environmental reasons. They're not, they're not doing it for their vegetable garden, so to speak, but although they do grow vegetables in the windowsill. But there are many reasons to do this. But as I said, each one of us, for every person on the planet, let's say if there's a little less than 8 billion people here, if we're losing 24, according to this scientist, 24 billion tons of soil are lost annually due to erosion. And in this book, what I like about, to bring it back to purpose, he relates the erosion of civilization, the demise, the collapse of civilization to over-harvesting. And you can look to the Fertile Crescent, you can look to the collapse of, most recently in Syria, when farming is not feeding your family, what do you do?
Right. Well, drought.
Drought.
You know, global warming exacerbated, if not caused by, drought caused by global warming, contributed to the strife there and to the refugee problem.
Yes, if we're able to feed our family, I believe we have an easier way to be peaceful. I think, and if your needs, if your basic needs are met, and we can start today. Now that we're all sheltering in place, and what do we do with this time? We can start as Keith and you were discussing in the beginning of this segment, with a sort of a closed loop practice where we're not relying so much on the outside, but here at home, I can make soil, I can grow vegetables, I can grow my rewild plants, and there's less of a need to go outside to get stuff. And what really bothers me is to go to the supermarket and get produce packed in plastic.
Don't do it.
No, that's exactly. So I'm motivated to become more sustainable. And Claire and I we were completely ready to start the community compost project at the Science Museum. And then, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. That's my favorite quote by John Lennon. But we're not giving up. We're just in a little bit of a standstill.
But you know what, Hildur? But we're doing it. We're doing it ourselves, and which is, and if we're going to be teaching people and encouraging people to do this, we need to be, all in on it ourselves and our own property, and then we can share it with others. So we're doing our homework and our research.
One step
to go big.
Yeah, I think the two go together. I mean, community composting, home composting. It's part of a healthy community. I just want to say one other thing. The hardest thing about a new habit is starting it. This is not a hard thing to do. It's a good thing to do. You'll feel good about it. It's not expensive to start. I want to offer encouragement. Anybody that wants to contact me, paul.merkelson@gmail.com. I'm happy to share my experience and practical advice, as is Raju, who's also, as I said, my co-conspirator. So again, doesn't have to be bokashi. You can, you know, if you say, I can't deal with all of that, electric composter sounds good to me, do it. If you got a compost pile and you're taking it outside, do it. If you have a
Yes.
neighbor that wants to do it and they don't mind taking your scraps, take them over to your neighbor. So I don't think much of that's going to happen.
Yes, and I wanted to recommend the blog. If we could maybe put the blog in the chat section here, or visit rewildlongisland.org. Rashu and Paul wrote this fantastic blog about starting the bokashi process, right? And
again, for those that want to get some more information, I think it's bokashi, BOKASHI, right?
yes,
And
That's right.
while it's not necessarily a composting method, it is an accelerator to composting, and it's also a way to go ahead and live life from the inside out, taking your straps and being able to create the fuel that then allows you to accelerate the composting process outside of your house, regardless of what time of season it might be. And then there are other methods that you mentioned, and I think putting it up on the site, as I think you just did, Hildur, which is great. People can see it in the chat box. And is there anything else as we come to the close here that people we might want to post or we might want to look at as we go forward?
I would love to include Phil and Connie, who are on here. Welcome to our little seminar here. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear whether you're composting, if you'd consider composting, and just in general, how you're doing since we're here together.
Hi, Phil. Good seeing you there.
Thank you, Keith.
This morning. How are you?
Good morning. We tried composting a few years ago, and a few could be even 10 years ago, and we didn't have any chemicals to put into the bucket, and so we gave up because some of the external animals found its way to the compost, and but now we know we can do it and have it odorless, basically, with that extra accelerator. So I'm interested in trying it again.
Good. Yeah, just
Excellent.
remember if you're going to do the bokashi or any food that's decomposing has to be covered when it's outside. So whether you're covering it with your leaves and yard waste or with soil, it has to be covered.
Yeah, and I have dogs, so they dig stuff up. So what we do is we actually enclose the compost. We can build sort of an entrapment around the compost pile. So that keeps, raccoons are also keen on compost piles. So
That's
that keeps.
what I was worried about, the raccoon.
Yeah. So if you can cover it if you're concerned. Yeah.
I have raccoons in my area. They'll go to my garbage can. But I've never had animals in the compost pile, with the exception of a hornet's nest once. I don't know how that could happen. But,
interesting.
Yeah, but I think just because it was there was some air pockets that they were able to get into. But you know, I would cover up anything that I put out there. But that's over 25 years. So I think that it's horrible if you do have, you know, animals digging through a compost pile, but I don't really, in my experience, it hasn't been a problem. If you cover it up.
Cover it up.
Keith, could you or Phil or Paul post some of these websites that you mentioned? I went by too fast to write down.
Yep,
Sure.
We will. They're in the chat box right now, but we'll save that so that we can post that as a part of the follow-up.
Okay.
Okay. Great. So I think next week, Hildur, we've got a segment 4 for those who are not zoomed out. We invite you to be here, and I think Hildur, we're going to continue this conversation about living life from the inside out and the outside in as we look at your environment now. Any parting words? Maybe 1 or 2 words from you or Paul specifically. I
would like to challenge. So, you know, this is like a tag team here. I'm part of a community, so it's not just me hosting your environment now here with you, Keith. I feel like I'm sort of part of a big network of very supportive friends that I love to give them a chance to speak. So Raju, are you free next Wednesday at 10?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
To speak specifically about Rewild Long Island. So Raju is the president of Rewild Long Island.
Nothing like putting you on in the spot in the public light.
Absolutely.
With the light, we are the light. I feel like it's a very natural sort of next step to talk about what's rewilding and how to rewild your gardening, and we could try to include other members of Rewild on the call, especially I'm thinking of Anne-Marie and some hands-on.
Great, we love that, Raju. I hope you can join. You can go ahead and provide some leadership and some insight in terms of what Rewild is all about, and help us all live life from the inside out and the outside in. So that'd be great.
Yeah, and he has a terrific compost pile. So if he's airing from his house in his backyard, he could show us what that looks like.
Well, I've never heard anyone be complimented in that way, Raju, but I know it's a compliment. So
That's high praise from Hildur.
Yeah, his backyard is probably one of the more functional backyards that I've ever visited. There's a farm of vegetables. There is a wildflower meadow, and just the most impressive compost pile.
Well,
and I really love dirt.
Raju, I almost think just giving us a tour of your garden is probably enough for the whole segment. So
I think so.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I always say there are famous composers and famous decomposers. So
that's great.
The latter category.
So we're gonna close out this segment. Hildur, Paul, thank you so much. Hildur, thank you so much. And Raju,
Thank you, Keith.
we look forward to talking with you next week. And we will post all this information up on the website as a follow-up, and send out an email as well. So we're going to close right now. And
Thanks for having us, Keith.
thank you.
Thanks again.